Hey, everyone.
Hey, Missy.
How are you?
Hey,
Hi, Andrew. Good to see you.
Hello.
We're going to put a couple things in the chat box here, Missy, to get some engagement going. We got a couple of quick questions. Pretty neat.
I love it. I'm excited for this.
Going to give some folks 2 or 3 minutes to kind of get settled in here, and hopefully they can take a minute and look at the chat box. That'd be good. Doom equals doom. Kelly, let's send that third question, then we'll get started. I'm curious to see. That's good. Thanks, Kelly. Well, hello, everyone. We'll go ahead and get started here. We only have so much time. So on behalf of the Select Group, I want to welcome you to our webinar series on the wonderful world of AI. My name is Wade Tulk, and I am the Director of Consultant Experience here at the Select Group, and I will be introducing our guest speaker today, Andrew Midkiff. I don't want to take up much time because I know Andrew has a lot to cover in his presentation. However, there are a couple of housekeeping items I just want to quickly touch on. So first of all, today is the first part of a 2-part series, which the second part is exactly a week from today at the same time. Secondly, there is a video recording available right after this that you can find on the Select Group YouTube channel. Third, following the presentation, there will be a dedicated Q&A session we will have. So I'm going to ask you to hold on to your questions until then. And there are going to be 3 different avenues you can ask a question. First, which is the best one, Andrew himself will be manning the Q&A section, which is right at the top of your screen next to the chat box. The second way, we'll be going through the chat box itself, and Kelly Dowland will be monitoring that one. And the third avenue is going to be raising your digital hand, and I'll be taking care of it. And I'll just go ahead and unmute you in the same order that you raise your hand, okay? So you can ask your question to Andrew verbally. Now, to introduce our guest presenter today, Andrew Midkiff. We've had a relationship with Andrew probably, Andrew, 11 years, something like that, in all different capacities. So we really value that relationship. And Andrew, I want to thank you for taking the time to do this today. I know it's a lot of work. It's a lot of information to cover. So we're very grateful for taking the time to do this for us. So without further ado, folks, I want to hand it over to Andrew. So Andrew, my friend, take it over.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it. Glad to have you here. There's so much going on these days with AI. I thought it might be helpful to at least give an introduction to how AI governance can help you navigate your way through the various fogs and around the rocks as you implement or expand your AI implementation. Next, please. So unless you've been in a coma, hopefully you haven't. If you have been, then welcome back. I'm sure you've noticed that there's a lot of hype and a lot of news around AI these days. The hype can range anywhere from the reasonably optimistically predictive to the aspirational, all the way to the apocalyptic. And of course, there are always people trying to make a quick buck off of it. Problem is acting on this hype, rolling out your AI using any of this hype as any sort of guide is highly fraught with peril. Successfully implementing AI requires a balance of clarity, of vision, control, and definitely flexibility. And one key element is establishing a governance framework to set your guardrails and the mechanisms to keep your employees productive and your company safe. Next, please. Many organizations do recognize the need for AI governance, but it's still not widely implemented. And this hesitation about AI, combined with the need to remain competitive, creates a challenging environment for executives. There's a lot of numbers here, especially the last two, where 72% of executives want to forego generative AI due to ethical and risk concerns. At the same time, 77% believe that they have to adopt AI quickly in order to remain competitive. Next, please. So, how do we address this tension? Well, one way is to implement a governance framework focused on the unique challenges and opportunities brought by AI in all its forms. AI governance ensures that your AI is implemented ethically, responsibly, and importantly, sustainably. Just like any governance framework, it's going to provide, your rules, your policies, your tools that will define how your AI systems will operate within your organization. And defining what you need for your AI governance journey can really set the stage for a successful and safe voyage. Next, please. To navigate this tension between AI's opportunities and risks, you'll need the right tools, vision, and community. So the first thing you need are navigational tools. In the past, we used compasses and sextants and things like that. In this case, I'm not necessarily talking about software tools. The main navigational tools that will help you with this implementation and through this journey are clearly defined business goals, targeted AI use cases, so you know exactly what you're trying to do, but also to have a clear vision of your organization's values and ethics. In other words, what really is important to you, especially in the context of this AI. I mean, AI is a powerful amplifier. It can boost positives like productivity and accessibility, but it can also exacerbate ills like misinformation and unfairness. It can mislead and even harm, and it can violate laws as well as the rights of individuals and groups. So defining and communicating your values and ethics can give you that North Star that can help you safely steer through the legal and reputational risks of AI. Clearly expressing your AI related values and ethics is crucial as well to building trust with your employees and even your customers. And that trust is essential to ensure a successful implementation. Next, please. You're also going to need a map of the potential dangers and obstacles. This includes a clear understanding of the risks and challenges of any AI implementation. As we saw from the statistics above, executives are definitely recognizing that there are risks around AI, but they also feel pressure to adopt it to remain competitive. As you work through your implementation, continuously monitoring for new risks and understanding their impact is crucial. The models are constantly changing, and sometimes the risk profile changes as well, often for the better, but not always. And we're going to look at some of the major risks a little later. And next, the final element is building the right community. You need a dedicated team who understands and will uphold your values and ethics and can implement the necessary processes and procedures to navigate these risks. A team that understands that their accountability to both responsible usage as well as one that can contribute to their diverse voices and experiences, both just discovering new and better uses of this technology as well as mitigating and identifying risks. I want to talk in more detail about one way to build such a community in the talk that Wade mentioned next week about creating an AI center of excellence. Next, please. Like any good map from the early years of exploration, there are areas where we've identified possible dangers. So let's begin drawing our map, looking at some of the more common dangers and risks that you're going to encounter when using AI systems. Next, please. So AI definitely poses security and privacy challenges. Some of them are familiar, some of them are new. The ability of these systems to process large amounts of data and generate natural language outputs, as well as accept natural language requests, excuse me, is a source of both power as well as potential danger. You no longer need your sharp SQL skills to dig out the secret data. Just like in all of your systems, data security should obviously be a priority. But your AI applications, in particular, almost certainly increase your attack surface and risk of sensitive data exposure, sometimes in ways that do not occur in traditional computer systems. Some of the key data security risks, and there are many, but some of them are unintentional, obviously, data leakage, model inversion attacks, and data poisoning. Data privacy risks include things like lack of transparency and control, data aggregation, and data inference. And all of these things can definitely lead to compliance challenges. So, carefully evaluating the risks and benefits is crucial when using any AI application that has access to your data. Next, please. Now we have the good old wreaths of hallucination, your misinformation and confabulations. This is a risk a little more specific to generative AI and less of a problem with most machine learning types of AI. It's because LLMs are built around being able to predict the likelihood of word sequences, but likelihood does not guarantee accuracy, especially on the wonderful internet from which a lot of these models were trained. So, one of the most insidious aspects of these confabulations, where the system generates very plausible sounding but fabricated nonsense, is that because they're so good at knowing what words are likely to go next, it causes them to confidently deliver confabulations with all of the authority you could ever possibly want. It's this voice of authority spouting complete nonsense that usually gets the most popular attention. We've all heard stories and seen examples of AI search engines saying absolutely made up facts with great confidence, or AI models completely inventing quotes or legal cases or other supposedly authoritative sources. The reality is, as the quote on the slide points out, really AI systems these days work best when the people using them know enough about the topic to be able to spot these mistakes. It's when we either don't know enough to see where it went wrong or we don't bother checking that we've run into trouble. In the end, there needs to be accountability by a person for every word used that was generated by a model. We're going to talk a little bit more about accountability later as well. Especially the higher the stakes, the greater need for informed human review of LLM outputs. Next, please. This is an example. I pulled this out last week. It has now been fixed, of a wonderful example of how this misinformation can be not only generated but reinforced. So the question is haggis an animal? And for those of you who are not familiar with haggis, it is a dish from Scotland. But there was a site that was very popular, the Haggis Wildlife Foundation, that it was a spoof site, and it talked about haggis as a small furry animal living in Scotland. Two of its legs were longer than the other two because they were walking on hillsides and things like that. What was interesting about this is this first was brought up in social media, and then it got a lot of attention. And what happened was a lot of people went out and upvoted this answer. They found it funny and they thought this is great. And they upvoted the answer, and that caused the algorithm, it caused the model to think, oh, this is a true answer. It's the same kind of crowdsourced wisdom that gets you Bodie McBoatface. It's funny, but not necessarily helpful in the end. I actually just checked this today, and it has been corrected. But still, the very first search terms, if you go below the AI portion of this, the very first search results are this Haggis Wildlife Foundation. So they had to purposely correct this. I have a feeling, because it was being the model was being misinformed that this was a correct answer. All right, go ahead and go next. So something a little less fun, bias and fairness. Although AI is improving, there's still areas that require human understanding, areas that AI models just really cannot grasp or understand, especially things such as the context and history around sensitive social issues. So AI bias and fairness are key concerns of any use of AI, generative or machine learning. I mean, AI can be tremendously helpful, but it's not perfect. Humans have unique creative, logical, and compassionate abilities that just are not there in AI models. Unfortunately, humans can also have biases, and the data upon which many of these models are trained, the data used for algorithmic analysis of large data sets, often have these very human biases built in. I mean, bias and unfairness can arise from many different kinds of bias. You have, for example, systemic bias that comes from the society in which the training data originates. You might also have data that itself was only gathered from limited demographics. Like up until the early 80s, almost all research trials way overrepresented healthy white male college students, because those were the people that were mainly used in those trials. Men still overrepresent in heart medicine trials, though those are getting better, and a lot of people are working hard to overcome those data biases and things like that. In the vast majority, for example, if in your training data, the vast majority of the images of CEOs shows older white men, maybe because historically that's what CEOs look like, then when you ask an AI to generate an image of a CEO, what you're likely to get is an older white man. At least that was when they first started. Some systems have tried to overcome this and compensate. And it sometimes can work well, but it can also be tricky. Last year, one of the large image systems tried to ensure more representation of non-white people in images, which resulted in a lot of people looking for images of Nazis and getting back a significant number of Nazis who were Black. It's this kind of context and history that is most difficult for AI systems to deal with without careful intervention. Next, please. So generative AI is obviously widely available now, and it's pretty much a given that it will likely be used within your organization, whether officially adopted or not. Governance is obviously crucial to managing the risks of this unofficial AI use that I call shadow AI. You may be familiar with the term shadow IT, where people outside of the official umbrella of the IT organization create their own applications, buy their own software, things like that. That's often called shadow IT. This shadow AI phenomenon, studies continue to show that a significant number of AI users are doing so in organizations without official approval. So it's fairly widespread. I suspect, though, that no matter what numbers studies come up with, and they range from 60% on up, they are woefully underreporting the extent of this shadow AI. So even when organizations try and forbid AI altogether, even blocking websites through firewalls, ubiquity and ease of access on personal devices makes this an inconvenience at worst. My recommendation is always instead to bring shadow AI users out of the shadows and into the light. By doing so, you can not only address the risks this unsanctioned use of unsanctioned tools brings, but you can also use this as an opportunity to possibly find new uses, new value that AI can deliver. So there are three key reasons that to address shadow AI, or three purposes for this. And the obvious one is the unseen risks. Unmanaged shadow AI obviously increases the likelihood of data breaches, privacy violations, and other risks that could bring in unintended and sometimes expensive consequences. The second one, though, is the missed opportunities. Employees may discover innovative uses of AI that could benefit the entire organization. This often happens with general purpose tools. A great example of this, of such an unimagined use, is this beautiful image you see on the slide. This lovely little, cherry blossoms, pine-covered islands off the coast of Japan. I doubt any of the developers, designers at Microsoft in the early 80s would have foreseen someone like retired Japanese businessman Tatsuo Horiuchi, who created this and many other large and complex works of art using Excel. Yes, this image was made in Excel. It is a worksheet in a workbook. And after his retirement, Mr. Horiuchi has gone on to make numerous of these very large artworks, print them out, and sell them. This was definitely not foreseen as a use of this very ubiquitous tool. When you have a tool as new and potentially wide-ranging as generative AI, your frontline employees are guaranteed to discover novel applications and efficiency gains that benefit the entire organization. So, shadow AI, while risky, can also be a source of untapped potential, but only if these uses are brought forward so everyone can benefit from the discoveries and that the risks can be adequately managed. And the third reason, in my opinion, to address shadow AI is that by doing so, you can surface some of the change management issues that bring trouble as you implement AI. Addressing shadow AI can be a complex problem. It's not as simple as saying, okay, stop doing it. Now tell us what you've been doing. It requires a multi-pronged approach, including shifting your culture to encourage transparency and responsible experimentation with AI. Give people a sandbox. Let them, if they want to play around and try new wild things, give them a safe space to do that. Clear communication of your AI strategy, your policies, and then provide training on responsible use. Let them know what these systems are good for and what they should not be used for. I just had a conversation over Christmas with a niece of mine who is managing a group of fluid dynamics engineers and doing computational fluid dynamics. And she found that several of her younger engineers were using ChatGPT to do research on what the possible regulations were around the work that they were doing. And ChatGPT was perfectly happy to provide those regulations, whether it knew them or not. So it was coming up with misinformation, it was coming up with confabulations. And because they had not thought about, was this an appropriate use of ChatGPT? Because this was not something in their training that, oh, you should not use it for this kind of thing. They just took it at face value and they submitted proposals using this bad information from ChatGPT. So the training of what these systems are good for, what they're not good for, what's an appropriate use, not an appropriate use, and giving them a safe space to then try out things. And the last thing is incentivizing employees to disclose their AI use by rewarding responsible innovation rather than punishing the illicit use of forbidden technology. This one is one of the harder points for leadership to often get their heads around, is that, oh, they've been doing what they weren't supposed to do for so long. And if you want that person to now admit that they were doing that, you have to have a way to show that you're not going to get in trouble if you did that. Let's bring this forward and let's talk through it and gain what we can from it. What are all three of these elements? Any attempt at bringing AI use out of the shadows and into the light will only be partially successful at best. All right, next one. So we've talked about our navigational tools. We've talked about the need for a good crew and the ship, and we've mapped out the most likely dangers, or at least some of them that we know of. What do we need to do to get started with AI governance? Well, one of the first things is, as I talked about before, defining and communicating your values and your culture. So an important part of this is to work ahead of the project to clearly define your organization's values and ethics. And that ethical stance, especially as it applies to AI. What are the outcomes you're looking for? What are you looking to get out of implementing AI? And how will these outcomes affect your employees? What impact will they have on your culture? Ensure these are well communicated across all impacted parties, possibly even including your customers. Next thing you'll want to do is make sure you're managing the change at an organizational and individual level. So AI implementation, just like any software implementation, even if contained and limited, can have a tremendous impact. AI in particular, because of the various forms of hype we discussed at the very beginning of my talk, which can range from highly enthusiastic to highly skeptical to apocalyptic. Gauging the readiness of your organization, including understanding this impact on culture and values, the sources of the fear, uncertainty, and dread, your FUD within your workforce, as well as potentially your customers, and having a clear vision for the desired impact that you're looking for can help you keep focus and will help you minimize negative impacts from the implementation. And just like any good governance, you will define roles and responsibilities. But with AI, it's more important than with many other general purpose systems to assemble a cross-functional and diverse team of voices. This diversity of experiences and functions is needed to ensure both to successful risk mitigation, risk identification, as well as identifying new opportunities. And once you have this representative group identified, your next step is to ensure that this diverse team has a voice in the decision making and the responses to issues around the system. Unlike a lot of regular general purpose tech systems, AI systems are more likely to be successful with a larger cross-functional base of responsible users whose voices can be heard and incorporated into the management of that system. So obviously with a governance system, you're going to want to set up the people, processes, and tools for risk management. We've seen a few of the major risks areas that AI can trigger. There are obviously many more. We've also seen that a great majority of executives recognize the potential for risk as one of the reasons to hesitate implementing AI. But setting up a robust process for identifying and monitoring your risks, it's vital. And unlike some other systems where you can identify your risks right up front, follow them along, track them, see if they become issues, etc. Because AI is constantly changing, and that jagged edge that defines what the system is good at and what it isn't good at, that changes rapidly as well. Risk management for AI systems needs to be equally dynamic and a continuous process, which may be different than what your governance organizations may be used to. You also need to create the means and mechanisms for gathering feedback to ensure both the continued safety as well as continuous improvement of your systems. There are many reasons to keep a close eye on your AI implementation and how it's being used in your organization. We've talked about its ability to amplify both the good and the bad, and that should never be left unmonitored. Feedback's essential because not only because of the potential for risks and the possibly amplified impacts mentioned already, but AI systems are not static. Once implemented, they do not stay the same. Even in traditional, more machine learning AI algorithms, you can have algorithmic drift, where after a while the results begin to be less helpful and a recalibration may be in order. Catching these risks and these benefits and these changes, basically as they happen, with a minimal gap between when you're noticing and you're responding, that's really essential to keeping your organization safe and keeping your AI implementation effective. The last is about delivering value and understanding the value your systems are bringing. So, despite the hype, AI implementations obviously still need to deliver value. Measuring this impact can be a challenge. I mean, there are traditional measures. It's easy to measure if something allows you to deliver more widgets or answer calls faster. But the benefits of introducing AI to your processes may not always be so easily quantifiable. Are your employees, for example, generating more good ideas from which they can pick? So that increases the overall quality of their work. Are your blog posts more focused and impactful? Are your filings with regulators less likely to be audited? Are there fewer gaps in your reports? Setting up mechanisms for your users to report their impressions and their experiences, both positive and negative, with the systems, that can actually augment any quantifiable measure you're already tracking. All right, next. In the end, if I can impart just one piece of guidance to organizations implementing or expanding AI, especially generative AI, it would be the critical importance of instilling a culture of accountability. This principle of accountability really must be the North Star by which we steer all of our AI journeys. Just as a ship's captain is responsible for the vessel's course and the safety of its passengers and crew, so too must there be clear ownership and answerability for the outputs and the impacts of our AI systems. Whether that be through human oversight, the human in the middle, rigorous auditing, or other accountability measures, we must ensure that someone, somewhere, is unequivocally responsible and answerable for what we use out of the outputs of these systems. I say that again. We must ensure that someone somewhere is unequivocally responsible and answerable for what we use that comes from these systems. There must be no cases of, well, that's what the computer said. Many of the stories of AI failure you see are actually failures of accountability. The lawyer who submits a brief with completely fictitious legal precedents. The scholarly papers submitted with non-existent footnote citations. There have been several recent examples of AI-generated news stories that were either completely making up something, or in one case I saw they was making up interviews with real people, quoting them on relevant topics when those people had never been interviewed at all. In the end, these are examples of a failure, not necessarily of the AI system, but really it's a failure of accountability, of no one accepting responsibility for what the AI systems produce. The consequences of this, they can be as minor as a haggis roaming the highlands of Scotland, or as serious as mental health chatbots suggesting self-harm to patients. I mean, lawyers have been reprimanded and fined. Companies have lost lawsuits and paid out settlements because no one was willing or able or thought it important to be accountable for the output. There are some cases, sadly enough, where people have possibly died because of this. In the end, someone will become accountable if the harm is serious enough. Isn't it better to take accountability before the information is used? Because you will definitely have to take accountability after to ensure that it doesn't happen again. So just as you do not automatically accept whenever a grammar checker tells you to do when writing a document, and that is a form of AI, you always, of course, will check to see, does this actually continue to make sense within the context of what I'm writing? You should not accept what an AI system tells you either, unquestioningly, without checking. Trust but verify. Check your work. Be accountable for what you use from the AI's output. In the end, by embedding a culture of accountability, we can navigate the uncharted waters of AI with greater confidence and care. Just as a skilled navigator plots a safe course using the tools at hand, knowledge of the dangers ahead, and a good crew, so too must we leverage governance, values and ethical principles, and accountability to guide our AI implementations to their intended destinations. Accountability must be at the center of all of our efforts, ensuring that the power of AI is harnessed responsibly and in service of the greater good. And only then can we be confident that our AI journey of discovery is on the right course, navigated by skilled and accountable hands. All right. Thank you. And that's how you can contact me and find out more information.
Fantastic, Andrew. Thank you. Well, let's keeping an eye on the time here. Let's jump into the questions, Andrew, in the Q&A section here. If you have
Right,
some, my friend.
I don't see any in the Q&A section at the moment.
Okay. And Kelly, any in the chat?
No, not yet.
See, Andrew, you did such a great job. You explained everything. It's fantastic. And I don't see any hands being raised. Oh, here we go. Here we go. Susie is coming through. So I'm going to, you should be able to, Susie, I think you can actually unmute yourself, I think.
Yeah, I'm here. I'm live.
Fantastic. All right.
How are you guys? Andrew, thank you so much for that. I had a question for maybe some folks that are in a large enterprise-sized organization that is starting to consider the launch of generative AI that may be something that's customer facing. What do you recommend in terms of launching? Do you recommend that you start with a small group or a specific market, or do you recommend just launch and get it out and refine quickly as you go through it? What would kind of be some advice or recommendation for more of those customer facing AI implementations that customers might be looking for?
So, well, it will depend. Of course, that's always the answer. What it comes down to is when you are going to be presenting something to the customers, your risk level goes up. The risk of reputational damage, the risk of even kind of legal repercussions. So the more care you put into ahead of time, the larger the rollout you can do. Also, if you're going to do a larger rollout, then your feedback loops and your accountability feedback has to be smaller, shorter, much tighter. So, especially at first, before you can really understand how well is this going to work, I would suggest, just as with any software that you're implementing, having a testing phase, having people being able to put up into a sandbox and have personas created to represent customers and different kinds and the kinds of concerns that you're going to get, and try out the system, see how it's going to work. The more care you can do and the more testing and the faster your feedback loops, the more comfortable I would be with a larger rollout. So if that helps.
Yes, that's very helpful. Thanks, Andrew.
Mhm.
Great. Kelly, do you have, I have a couple of more hands raised, but I want to go back to the Q&A section or the chat section if we have a couple there.
We're good on the chat. It was just the only
Okay.
question was, would the recording be available? So I answered that for him.
Fantastic. Andrew, any on your end?
Nothing in Q&A, so go ahead.
All right. All right. Angel, I think, Angel Smith, I think you can unmute yourself. Go right ahead.
All right. Again, echoing what Susie said, great presentation. Thank you very much, Andrew. I'm definitely one of the more skeptical, the sky is falling because Skynet is here type of people. This stuff scares me because decisions are being made using information that could be 100% factual or completely wrong, and people are making decisions based on that. So that terrifies me. My question is this. I get defining the values and the culture of a company as you start to define how AI is going to be used is helpful and beneficial. But what about building a buffer in there for how those values and culture of a company change as leadership changes? I mean, even a 200, 500 person company, they, the current CIO or founder, or CEO founder, retires and his son takes over, and the son is like, we are charging forward and we're, taking the gloves off and we're going to adopt this generative AI, and that the values and the culture of the company completely shift.
Right. Well, go ahead.
That, like, how would someone navigate that? And I ask that because I see how culture is changing within my own organization as we continue to grow. So yeah, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's so cultural and ethical impacts upon your AI implementation. I consider that along with risks. So to me, that's a risk that could have an impact on your company's culture, on your employees, even on your customers. And just as any risk factor changes, you need to reevaluate that risk and understand what is the possible impact, the likelihood, et cetera. To me, that is another risk that would need to be reevaluated. And new leadership needs to be asked. So we have this system, and the system is also built upon, and our training is built upon, our governance is built upon understanding a clear statement of our ethics. Here's what we have. Here's our ethical framework. Here's our values statement. And is it changing from, maybe your current values are, we want this to augment our employees to make their work life, less tedious and to spend more time on creativity. Maybe the new leadership is, no, we want to actually reduce our headcount or do more with the same amount of people, or whatever their approach is. That needs to be incorporated then into your whole AI system governance. That will have a significant impact upon what you do and how you do it. And it should trigger a bunch of your risks to become issues if that radical of a change happens. So,
Yeah, interesting. We just went through our SOC 2 risk assessment piece of our annual audit, and AI adoption wasn't even added as a risk. And listening to you, that was a miss. So
and
thank
I
you.
think that's where a lot of these companies that are not implementing governance for AI, they're just thinking, oh, it's like, putting in Word. We're changing from, Word to Google Docs. What's the big deal? It is a big deal. It is tremendous risk. And I think a lot of executives are starting to recognize that, but they don't quite know how to deal with it. And that's why you get that tension between the 72% are like, and the
And the
77%, but we got to do
77%.
this.
Yeah.
So
How long do you think it is before we have positions created like Chief AI Officer?
they're already happening. We actually had, as part of the executive order that came out of the White House last year, part of that executive order was we needed to have chief AI officers identified for every federal agency. And they were in the process of doing that. Now that executive order has been rescinded, but the process of actually creating and defining that is something that is happening. Actually, I work for a small consulting company, and we have put together a service for a fractional chief AI officer. For primarily, we work with mission-driven organizations, nonprofits and things like that, who are serving populations. And so, we're not the only ones doing that. But I think it's starting to gain some traction, especially as people see the results and the consequences of these risks. I've seen there's a large company that eliminated a bunch of people thinking that AI chatbots could take over all of their customer service. And they're now backtracking that and realizing we need to actually use AI to augment our current employees rather than replace them. Nothing will actually replace people when it comes to interacting with our customers. So,
Thank you.
sure. Thank you.
Some great questions, Angel. Thank you. I see Jacqueline with a hand raised, but she also has a question in the QA. So, Jacqueline, why don't you go ahead and I'm assuming it's the same question. Why don't you go ahead and kind of just ask it so people can hear it?
Yeah, certainly. Hi, Andrew. Great to hear your voice again. Thank you for this great presentation.
Yeah.
You had mentioned early on something about model inversion attacks, and I wondered if you could describe that in more detail.
That's a little complicated, but essentially, there are different ways of attacking your actual model. And sometimes through asking questions, the model can be attacked. I don't know enough of details around it. I know just enough to be a little dangerous. That's not my area of expertise, but there is definitely literature out there about those kinds of attacks. And depending on your type of model that you're using, how that model is secured or not secured, how public it is, these model inversion attacks can have different impacts. But it's amazing how creative people can be when it comes to security and trying to get around security and privacy. People are infinitely inventive. There was a recent, in terms of like data corruption, there was recently a study that came out that showed that one of the Russian misinformation groups had posted huge amounts of positive Russian propaganda into various targeted areas of the internet that they knew were being used to train models. And so certain models were starting to then spout that positive propaganda as a higher probability than otherwise. So, there's data infection, there's all kinds of different interesting and creative ways to infect our systems. So
Thank you. That's helpful.
I wish I could go into great detail about that, but like I said, I know just enough to probably get myself in trouble.
Understood. Thanks, Andrew.
Mhm.
Thanks, Jacqueline. Great question as well. I do not see any other questions unless I'm missing any, Andrew, on your end or Kelly on your end.
Yep, all clear here.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, in that case, Andrew, thank you so much. A lot of great information. We really appreciate that.
Terrific.
And
Thank you all very
everyone,
much. And there's a lot more out there around this. I highly encourage you to look up some of the sources on AI governance and think about the risks to your organizations.
thank you, Andrew. And we hope to see everybody here same time next week. And don't forget, the recording will be available here shortly on our YouTube channel. All right. Thank you so much, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, Andrew.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.